In my 15 years as a screenwriter, I've sought endless screenwriting advice. The way someone playing Jumanji just like desperately needs the rules, you know? I've read every single how-to book on the subject that I can find, most of which are on the shelves behind me. I've watched every video online that I can find. I've spoken to experienced writers and inexperienced writers in writers' rooms. But in all that reading and watching and talking and doing, no piece of screenwriting advice compares to this. This is the greatest piece of screenwriting advice I've ever heard.
And in the hospital, I got this image of the taxi cab. It came to me. This yellow rectangular coffin, metal coffin, floating through the open sewers of a metropolis. And inside that coffin is trapped a young man. And it looks like he's surrounded by life, but in fact, he's absolutely alone. And the power of that metaphor just overwhelmed me. And I knew I had to write that story because I was becoming that young man. And the only way I could not become him was to establish his identity apart from mine, to write about him.
The voice you're hearing belongs to Paul Schrader, the screenwriter who wrote Taxi Driver, Martin Scorsese's seminal, strongly influencing later events.
I'm sorry, what's that? Oh, that's very funny, Murray. You know, I'm also a comedian.
Martin Scorsese's seminal and spectacular cultural explosion of a film, now on just about every list of the greatest films of all time. Paul Schrader wrote his screenplay using a very unique method, which I'm going to share with you here. Now, the method Paul Schrader uses, you can use too for similar results, and it comes in just 2 easy steps. Well, not easy technically, they're kind of like bold steps. Brave, really. They require you to be fearless. Okay, 2 fearless steps. The first step in this process is both straightforward and kind of tough. It just involves answering one simple question. What is the biggest problem that you are going through in your life at this particular moment in time that you cannot resolve, that you cannot get past, that consumes your life, and that you would do anything to fix? Okay, this is the hard part. The part where you go into some dark corner of your life and confront what's there. I imagine you've already got it in mind. This is Paul Schrader's example.
And I was in a period in my life where things were not working. And I was becoming something that frightened me. I was becoming increasingly isolated, increasingly angry, increasingly alcoholic, and increasingly depressed. And I'd been traveling and living in my car for several weeks. And I had a pain in my stomach, and it was a bleeding ulcer. I was 25. I went in the hospital, and I realized when I walked in the hospital that I hadn't spoken to anyone in a number of weeks.
Schrader's problem at the time was alienation and loneliness, but yours can be anything. Guilt, a crisis of identity, sexuality, religion, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that it's a great big personal obstacle in your life, stopping you moving forward. All step 1 is to tap it and bottle it, because it's going to be the fuel for step 2. There is a point to this, I promise. So about now you might be asking yourself, why has he brought me down in this way? And the answer is because now you are on fresh storytelling snow.
I went in the hospital and they gave me a room. And this metaphor came to me. And it was a metaphor of a big yellow taxi cab. And there was a young man imprisoned inside, and he couldn't get out. And everybody thought he was surrounded by people, but he was absolutely alone. I said, that's who I am. I'm that guy. I'm that taxi driver. And that was the first time I had connected a personal problem to a functional metaphor. The metaphor is something that expands upon the problem and makes you understand it better. I didn't want to become this kid who I called Travis Bickle. And I felt that the only way not to become him was to externalize him and therefore exorcise him, the same way you would do with a voodoo doll and stick him with all your venomous pins.
So the second step in this process is to take your internal conflict and express it, not literally, but as a metaphor.
Now, what is a metaphor? A metaphor is not the same thing as the problem. It's something like the problem, but not the problem itself. Using myself as an example, I'd say, you know, I did a film about loneliness, about young male loneliness. And I said to Marty, I said, you know, we don't really need all that talk about loneliness. He does mention it, and that's enough, because every time we see that big yellow cab, we see it. And that yellow cab is so much more effective as a visual representation than is the narrative words.
In Schrader's case, he took his journey of loneliness, and instead of expressing that with straightforward plot exposition, he took his inner turmoil and translated it into a symbol. It's in this metaphor that you will find a rich, nuanced story that works on multiple levels and is more effective than 95% of the scripts out there. No exposition, no cliche, no formula, no imitation. Travis Bickle's isolation and descent into violence are not just personal issues, they also serve as a metaphor for urban decay, societal alienation, and the dark underbelly of American life. The external world, the gritty streets, the moral ambiguity of the city, mirrors and amplifies this internal conflict. And you can see this at work in other films too.
Frankenstein, a metaphor for mechanical progress. Now, they don't have to actually talk about the machine age while making the Frankenstein film, but you know that's the anxiety that is driving that story. We are making machines that are doing human things. A metaphor could be sometimes an occupation, taxi driver. It could be a historical moment in time. It could be a certain kind of love story. But it has to be something that expresses your problem without being the problem itself. And if you have a good problem and a good metaphor, a lot of the battle is won already. And great films often have great metaphors. And if you look back at history, you'll see the great metaphors. Once you get a rock-solid metaphor, the task gets much easier. I spend more time looking for metaphors than I do for looking for stories, because once you have a metaphor, a story will come.
So step 2 of Schrader's technique is to take your personal problem and drive it through a metaphor. But it can't just be any metaphor. This is the cool part. This is the part where he talks about the sparks.
It's like two wires. You have the problem and the metaphor, and they have to get close enough for a spark to jump across. And if they're too far apart, there'll be no spark, and if they're on top of each other, there'll be no spark. So you have to tease them and play with the spark.
By sparks, Schrader means that if your metaphor is too obscure, too far from your actual core problem, then it just becomes invisible to the audience. It's just another story, just another visual style. The audience don't connect to the personal problem that inspired it. But neither do you want to present your story simply as it is. There's no universal truth in that, no deeper meaning or shared common experience. And frankly, it also gets less compelling, less entertaining. It's telling, not showing. Schrader's technique avoids the pitfalls of heavy-handed exposition. Instead of spelling out the characters' problems in dialogue, the metaphor allows the audience to gradually uncover the underlying themes. This makes your story feel more organic and more unsettling, as the viewer is invited to piece together the deeper meanings behind what is happening on screen. So your metaphor has to have this sweet spot where your personal conflict is shining through and even present on screen. Rosemary is being manipulated by the men around her. Amelia is grieving in The Babadook. Cities are being destroyed in Godzilla, and Travis is alienated in Taxi Driver. And yet, your personal conflict can't be so on the nose that it reads like a news story in place of a dream, with facts but no feelings, without the audience making their own connections. It's in this sweet spot between these two poles that true art and true glory can be found. It's kind of a no-brainer that this process works and that it has led to some of the greatest films of all time. Myths and stories serve as a kind of roadmap for life, a way for us to understand and navigate its mysteries. They encapsulate universal themes that every one of us experience. From the campfire to IMAX to Netflix, storytelling, even when it's only entertainment, has always been about showing you how to confront life's obstacles, to overcome them or find acceptance when you can't, about what you want versus what you need, about what's possible in life and what to avoid. Writing is putting things in order. By framing the chaos of life within a narrative structure, stories help us find meaning in the world around us. They answer fundamental questions about who you are, why you suffer, and what it means to be human. So, why do it this way? I'm sure, like me, shortage of ideas for new stories are not your problem. Well, for one, you're more likely to finish it. If you have a problem starting scripts and not finishing them, then this will solve that. When your fuel is a problem that won't go away, you keep returning to the script until it or the problem is done. Paul Schrader did not set out to write one of the greatest films of all time. He wrote Taxi Driver as self-therapy. He believes that art is a tool, that it's functional, that it is a way for the artist to work through what unsettles them and to exercise their demons. And here's the other reason to do it this way.
If you're thinking I can become a successful writer by copying a movie I just saw, why would they want you to do that? They've got hundreds of people who can copy that movie. In fact, they're all copying it right now. Why would they hire you? Why would they fool around trying to teach you how to do what everybody else knows how to do already? So the only thing that you have as an entree is something that is relatively unique to you. The sand in your particular oyster will have to be that thing that is agitating you, that you would like to find a way to represent. You are your own material. Your material is not elsewhere. Your material is not in the newspapers or the TV shows or the books or the manga. Your material is essentially yourself. You have to study yourself and not movies. You have to study what it is that is making you think you might need to write or tell a story or paint or sing a song.